Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IFST webinar on allergens in raw materials, organised by my colleague Malcolm Laidlaw of our Northern Branch. My name's Alex Guest. I'm a fellow of the IFST and a member of the Northern Branch, and have been in the food industry under many guises and many roles over the last 30 years, which with my present role, which encompasses compliance and sustainability. The webinar itself, Allergens in Raw Materials, will give an oversight of the background on legislation for allergens and discuss a number of areas such as co-mingling, primary and processing contamination, documentation information, which, to be fair, are all key points for allergen management. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to IFST's webinar hub, so it's obviously available again. Feel free to make any comments and ask any questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote other people's questions by clicking on the like button next to the question. So basically, if you feel there's a question that's already been there and you like the question, you want it to be answered, well, there. The question and answer obviously session will be at the end of the presentation, and we'll try and get as many questions in as possible. So bear with me. It's my first time actually trying to look and do the question and answer thing, but I will do my best and we'll try and get as many questions in as possible. Our speaker today is Malcolm, has worked in the food industry for many years, including the hot topic of allergens and the controls. If you want any more information on the speaker's biography, please look on the IFST website and you will find Malcolm's details and information on there. So without further ado, so you're not listening to me, I will hand over to you, Malcolm. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm handing over to. I'll hand over to you now. So.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So, thank you to Alex. My name is Malcolm Laidlaw. I'm a technical consultant. As Alex has said, I've been in the food industry for a number of years. I work currently with a number of companies, right the way from primary producers, right the way through to manufacturers into the retail sector. This presentation was really put together initially to do with a request from a Northern Branch member to help train some new students at the University of Newcastle. They are doing a food science course that has a module specifically on allergens, and this was really looking at it from a practical industry sort of view. When I started putting this together, I didn't really want to just do a normal routine, this is where you find the allergens, this is where kind of allergens there are. So I'm trying to look at what challenges there are there where you're looking at raw materials. So we'll cover off a little bit about legislation, a little bit about the background of allergens, and then we'll go through 3 different key topics within raw materials. We'll talk about commingling, primary processing contamination, and then documentation. Okay. Just a little heads up, this presentation is my views, is based on what I've learned and what I've been taught. When you're looking at allergen information, please bear in mind that legislation can and does change, codes of practice and professional opinions also change, so you must keep up to date. Currently, most of our food legislation is still the same as it was when we were in the EU. Although we have left the EU, this legislation hasn't changed. If that does change in the future and you supply into the EU, bear in mind that you will need to comply with EU legislation as well as any potential UK legislation. In terms of the legislation around allergens, the main information or the main legislation is EU 1169/2011, which came into force in 2014. So it's been around for nearly 10 years now. And that has set out what the allergens are, but also around the offences that can be raised under it. There's only one offence that can be directly raised under the Food Information for Consumers regulations, and that specifically relates to allergens. All other offences are more likely to be raised either under the Food Safety Act or under food hygiene legislation. Just to give a little bit of background in terms of the scale of this, allergens were the second biggest cause of incidents in England and Wales in 2022 to 23, with 314 incidents there. And when we talk about allergens specifically in this presentation, we're looking at the 14 legally declarable allergens within the EU/UK. They are cereals producing or cereals containing gluten, eggs, fish, crustaceans, soya, celery, milk, tree nuts, mustard, sesame seeds, sulfur dioxide, lupin, and mollusks. Some of the things that we're talking about, particularly in the commingling part of it, we think we know about where allergens are and what sources there are, but what about potential cross-contaminations? So, why do allergens become contaminated with, why does a raw material become contaminated with an allergen that's not expected to be there? Potentially down to commingling of the raw material, either that or through initial processing of it, or there could be issues around documentation and information and how that is interpreted that therefore leads to issues, which we'll explain later. So in terms of commingling is a term I came across when I was researching this, and it's really around the result of different crops being grown close to each other, different crops sharing the same field, potentially due to crop rotation, sharing the same equipment, either during harvesting, transport, or farm storage, but also thinking about what can happen in wildlife. So where a bird can pick a nut up and drop it, for example. Also bear in mind, all our crops don't just come from the fields. We also have other animals and also things like the seas. So where can contamination come in a sea, for example? Even if you have the best industry practices put in place, commingling potentially can still occur. Okay. So just some examples of that. Carrots grown in the field, they're not an allergen, but what are the risks of them? We may have nut trees around the edges of the fields. We may have cereals that have previously been grown in that field. Equally, we may have mustard or celery, for example, that's been grown in there. And we use cereal straw to cover the carrots over in the winter in the UK to store them in the field. That's an example of a carrot crop that's been covered with straw, and within that straw there will be small grains left in there. The likelihood of those carrots actually becoming contaminated, in reality, it's fairly low. But it's about how you view it and how you risk assess it in terms of determining whether you believe that that is a high risk or a low risk. In terms of oats, oats naturally are gluten-free. Now, gluten is a mixture of two proteins, glutenin and gliadin, that when they're mixed together in the presence of water, combine and form gluten. As I say, oats don't naturally contain any. However, they are often grown alongside other cereal crops. They'll be commonly grown in rotation with them. The farm may grow oats, wheat, barley, rye, for example, and it's very difficult to eliminate all seeds or all grains when you're planting them or when you're harvesting them if you are growing multiple cereal crops out there. And looking at those, the actual grains, there are some differences in there, but it's very difficult to actually identify every single grain that is out there. A little bit of a random one, sweet potatoes. Again, sweet potatoes are grown in the field. It's not something that you would really consider to be a risk. However, in America, sweet potatoes are grown in rotation with peanuts. So when you hear that, your initial view is, okay, what are the risks? Certainly the grower that I dealt with a long time ago, they had separate equipment, they had separate coloured trailers, separate pack houses. So they had done a number of activities to actually reduce the risk down to a minimum. However, it's that understanding that there is a potential risk in the supply chain, and how does that come through to potentially a finished product. Moving away from a land-based crop to one from the sea, so seaweed. It's quite niche and trendy nowadays to put seaweed in your products. However, you know, what else is in the sea? What are the risks from them? So fish is the obvious one. Fish could potentially swim through the seaweed. The likelihood of fish becoming, or the seaweed becoming contaminated with the fish is fairly low. They may swim through, but unlikely to actually contaminate it that much. However, crustaceans are often found attached to the seaweed. And depending on the type of the seaweed, if it's a nice, flat, straight kelp type product, then you're more likely to be able to spot it. If it's a dulse type product that's more flowery and crinkly, it's quite difficult to actually see them, potentially when they're very, very small. And it's a natural environment they grow in, so you can't really control what's in there. So it's really down to post-harvest and processing techniques to actually reduce the level of the risk down. And exactly the same for mollusks. Again, the mollusks will be found in the sea. They will be found attached to the seaweeds. And again, it will depend on the type of the seaweed and how you can process it, whether you can actually reduce the risk down. In terms of why is this important? So this was, the next slide is just taken a couple of screenshots taken from LinkedIn that I've seen in the last week. So this person on the left, they're saying that they have spent 3 to 4 hours searching for an allergen-free vegan kelp powder. Their current supplier changed the specifications, rendering it unsuitable. And he then goes on to say that there are lots of issues around trying to find products that are allergen-free and questioning how people who potentially have BRC status or even higher fail in their allergen management. Part of me says that this is a lack of understanding of the actual raw material, in as much that trying to find a crustacean mollusk-free seaweed is going to be very, very challenging. The other part of it is just around that understanding around your business. One of the comments that came back to that initial post was this one on the right, which is saying, it's why my team at such and such a site and myself built an allergen-free manufacturing site to get away from these headaches and to be inclusive to everybody. That's great. You've built an allergen-free factory. However, if your raw material going into it isn't allergen-free and you can't guarantee that, what's the point of it? What is that? What are you actually trying to achieve? If you are manufacturing specifically for allergen sufferers, then to me, you need to be fully aware of what is the risk of your raw materials. Also bear in mind other types of, or other potential ways of commingling. What do cows eat? What do chickens eat? Okay. We never think about what our animals eat and whether there is any allergen risk in there. The current belief is that particularly for eggs, for example, it doesn't matter what your chicken eats, it wouldn't get through into the egg. However, whether there has been any scientific work done to actually confirm that, I'm not certain. So that's the sort of type of things we need to think about when we're actually looking at raw materials in the primary production sort of area. When we then move on to the initial processing sections, we need to think about what kind of shared equipments there are, what kind of allergen controls in there, and how easy is it actually to clean equipment between different allergens. We talked before that oats are naturally allergen or gluten-free. Unless you have a business that is purely dedicated to growing, harvesting, processing oats, you're always going to have a risk of contamination. A lot of the cereal that comes into the UK comes in great big bulk ships. They will handle lots of different types of grains and potentially also soya as well. It's hard enough trying to clean surfaces within a food factory to make sure that they're allergen free. Imagine trying to do it on a 30,000 ton bulk carrier that you literally drop a digger in to actually get the grain out. It's going to be pretty much impossible to guarantee that that is free from any contamination. When we think about processing, again, there was a study done in America, and this was, America and Europe, looked at 109 oat products on the market and found that some of them contained over 200 parts per million of gluten. Now, bearing in mind that the 20 parts per million of gluten is the legal limit for a product to be gluten-free, we need to start questioning, well, where's the cross-contamination occurring? A couple of years ago, there was a potential big issue around soy lecithin. So soy lecithin is an emulsifier, normally made from unrefined soya oil, commonly used in chocolates, bread, dairy, infant formulas, and ready meals. Obviously, it's got soya in it, so it's naturally allergenic from a soya point of view. However, back in 2022, there were concerns raised over traces of peanut oil being found in the soy lecithin. And this started to become a potential real issue for food manufacturers in the UK, but also around the world. It's been raised, and they found that there is a risk that peanuts are there, or peanut oil is there. The FSA actually looked at it and started to go down the route of doing some work around precautionary allergen labeling and using the system, Vital system, that's based in New Zealand and Australia. So they actually worked with manufacturers to say, if you can work with us and show us that if that oil, the peanut is there, that in the finished product, it would be at a level that is less than the level that's described in Vital as being a concern, then you can carry on selling that product. So they actually managed to avoid recalling lots and lots of products. There were some that were recalled because they couldn't obviously do that level, or they couldn't guarantee it. But it's the first time that I'm aware of in the UK that the FSA has actually gone down this route of using some form of basis of the Vital system, if you like. Moving on, in terms of documentations, when you're looking at producing a new product, one of the main things you start with is you look at your raw materials, you start getting your specifications from your different suppliers. And depending on what size of business you are, you may request them either in your format, or it may be just supplied by the actual supplier into you. There's no set legal format in terms of how that information is provided, as long as the business must be able to supply the relevant information to yourselves or any other business that requests it. So the next few slides are just some different examples of allergen sort of contaminations pages from various specifications that I've seen. So you can see that some of them are fairly straightforward. They'll just list the 14 and whether it's free from, may contain. Some of them literally just say it's within the actual product description. Some of them will say yes, no's. Some of them will just give a list without anything. Some of them gives ones and twos, for examples. So it becomes very difficult from a raw material technologist point of view to actually put that into a sensible format that works for your business. And different businesses will have different ways of looking at it. Just a couple of examples in terms of how it can go wrong. So there was a manufacturer of toffee bits. They made them on a line that handles milk. The specifications stated that milk is handled on the line, but wasn't in the ingredient list. So first of all, is it legal? It is. There was no milk specifically in those toffee bits, but it did say that it could be in present as a may contain. Would you use that as a product or an ingredient in a milk free from product? The answer probably should be no. However, a biscuit maker used that product, those toffee bits, in a free from milk product, and they took the information from the ingredient list rather than from the specification. Unfortunately, one person suffered an allergic reaction. There was a recall. It cost the business around £37,000 plus loss of confidence, obviously all the increased testing costs and additional audits. So how you get your information, where you take it from, how you actually use that information needs to be carefully considered, particularly when you're making free from claims. Another example, cheese normally is made from milk. Okay. Would you consider egg to be in cheese? Probably not. However, a ready meal manufacturer uses a hard cheese in a product. They didn't actually have any agreement with the company that they purchased from, which was an agent, and it was really just, you supply me some hard cheese, I'll just use it. So there was no real spec there. There was no agreement as to what the allergens contained. They got sent a new batch of cheese that actually contained egg. And just to show you an example, so this is just off the internet. Certain types of cheese will only contain milk. Certain types of cheese will contain milk and eggs. Okay. That particular example there, again, led to a product recall and big investigation into it. So in terms of summary, understand your raw materials, really understand the supply chain right the way back to the primary production. It's very difficult because nowadays we have quite long supply chains, and particularly where the product is grown or harvested outside of the UK, it becomes even harder. But understand what the potential risks are. If you are actually looking at a product where you want to make it specifically from a free from product, then be particularly careful about the risks and actually speak to your suppliers and try and get assurances from them as to what the risks are of contamination from themselves, but also further back down the supply chain. Again, double check the information you're given and how you use it. And my personal opinion, only make claims if you're absolutely certain that there is no risk there. Okay. Alex?
Oh, so yep, hi, I'm back.
Okay.
Yep, sorry.
Okay.
Get my video thing working.
Okay.
It doesn't look like it wants to work.
Well,
Sorry about this. It's not
quite all right.
no, it's not working. It's oh, there we are. It's come up. Right, okay. Well, thank you very much, Malcolm. Obviously allergens is quite a hot topic as we speak at the moment. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of discussions around it. So it's an interesting and engaging presentation. So hopefully people have got a few things in there. So we're now on to moving on to today's question and answer session. So you'll have to bear with me. It's my first time doing this, so you'll just have to go through. So I'll try my best. As a reminder, you can submit questions using the question and answer button, which is at the bottom of your screen. Now, I do think we have a question. Yes, we do have a question. So I'll endeavor to answer this one. Okay. Ask this one. What is your view on ingredient alibi labels being carried over to the finished product manufactured from it? No free from claims made on the final product, but should the final product be alibi labeled? Similar thoughts if the supply of the raw material shows they handle the allergen, but do not alibi label it. What's your thoughts on that one?
Can of worms is my initial thought. I think it becomes very difficult where manufacturers are buying products in from suppliers who handle various allergens. I think it's around understanding the controls that the suppliers have in place. So is it dedicated? Might be that they handle that particular allergen on site, but they don't handle it on the line that you take your product from, for example. It might be that they have very good allergen clean down systems in place. It's a relatively straightforward, simple equipment that can be easily cleaned, and they've got good levels of validation and verification to show that the cleaning is effective. In which case, I would probably say that the precautionary allergen labeling may not be required. However, if they can't supply that level of guarantee or that level of information, then I would certainly be looking at some form of alibi labeling on that.
Yeah, well, that's good. And we have another question. What is the value of raw material allergen testing, and at which point should this be carried out for best effect?
I think allergen testing of raw materials is probably a limited benefit. It would depend on what your raw material is. But if I take the example of the carrot, testing a carrot for gluten or for nuts is probably not really worth it from a financial point of view and what you're going to get out of it. I think it would be about understanding the risks, certainly trying to identify what the allergens that could contaminate the raw materials are, what the likelihood of that is, and it will depend on what your raw material format is. So is it a carrot, a sweet potato, or has it been processed in some format? It would help you as part of your due diligence. However, I would be nervous saying that I've tested one carrot out of 25 tons, and that one carrot was nut free. Therefore, I'm going to assume that everything else is nut free.
And I think I agree with. I particularly agree that it's mainly to be looking at. It's one of the parameters to use. It's pretty much more that you review your supply chain. You're looking at your supply chain. What are the risks within that supply chain, alongside any testing that will come out of that supply chain risk assessment. So I agree with that one. Okay, let me go to our next question here. What is your opinion on may contain allergen on products?
it was interesting having done the presentation to the students over at the Newcastle University, and there were 2 of the 6 students who actually had suffered from allergies, and taking their view from it. In an ideal world, you would make it very clear that this product either contains or does not contain. However, I think the complexity of the supply chains, the complexity of food manufacturers nowadays means that to guarantee a product is free from is very, very difficult. Bearing in mind that there are only 2 allergens currently in the EU, UK that have legal limits. So gluten has a legal limit of 20 parts per million. Sulfites has a legal limit of 10 parts per million. Everything else, in theory, is 0. Whether the work that FSA are looking into to try and come up with some form of UK-based Vital system will help in the future. It certainly would make life easier from a manufacturing point of view, that I think you could decide we've done some testing and it's below this threshold level. I think it would be easy from that point of view. But from an allergen sufferer's point of view, equally, I understand that it does limit your potential choice of foods.
Okay. So I've got a question here which has basically got some more votes on, so I'll put it at the top here. Okay. How many tests on finished product would you conduct to feel comfortable to call your product free from? I think can I put something in there?
Yes. Yeah.
free from, for me, doesn't exist. And this is my personal opinion about free from. It doesn't exist because any testing that you do will only give you to less than limited detection. You cannot test for 0. Then this is the issue with free from products. You cannot test from 0. All you can do is test for analytical 0. And that analytical 0 may still contain that allergen present, but lower than the limit of detection. So you're also giving yourself a false sense of security as to say, well, it is actually free from. Well, no, I think until the legislation there is, because there's actually no legislation to say free from currently. So unless there's guidance or legislation put out there, I'd be very, like I said, I would be very wary of free from. That's my thoughts on it.
I totally agree with you, Alex, on that one. In terms of number of tests, 1 certainly isn't enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the scientist point of me, I would want as many as possible, 10, 50, but then it becomes from a commercial point of view, what is the cost of it? Going back to the seaweed example, I actually work with a dried seaweed producer, and we have looked at whether we can do a crustacean and mollusk-free product. We believe that we've got a couple of ideas of how we can process it to reduce the risk down. When we started investigating the cost of it, to actually give us sufficient confidence in it, we got quoted somewhere between 60 and 70,000 pounds just to do the allergen testing. Now that kind of ruled it straight out to begin with. So yeah, if you want to be as certain as you can be, you have to test an awful lot.
Okay, I think there's a question sort of linked to that that's come in. As more and more information and learnings are gathered as time goes on, is there a risk that free from disappears from the market, or will vital information become more and more critical in making decisions? Again, I'll put something in there. You're vital and more closely aligned to what most of the legislators are looking at is Codex. It's about looking at whether there is a risk of that allergen being present. It's not about, as I say, it's not about free from. As I say, that if you look at the Codex work that's been done, they have they have stated that it isn't to do with free from. It's about whether the label needs to have some PAL on it because of there's a risk from the allergen being crossover from whether that's a supply chain or whether that's within the manufacturing unit. So free from needs to be almost separated out from the PAL and the vital because it will confuse it, and I think that's where I would stand on it.
I agree with you. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Hope that answers the question. Okay. So let's have another one. We are getting a fair few questions coming through, so I'll try and get them as quickly as I can. Is lupin still considered as an allergen in the UK food system?
Yes.
Yeah.
Legally, yes.
Yeah. I thought that was okay. Yeah, that is. So I've answered that one. Right, okay, answer another one here. Should the current list of declarable allergens be extended? I know for a fact that the EU are looking at reviewing more different allergens. As yet, they haven't put anything in place, but they are reviewing it.
I think that there's lots of different countries have different allergens out there. Kiwi, strawberries, and tomatoes kind of seem to crop up as potential ones that could be added onto the list. There is part of me that says, how far do you go? I know there was a report probably about 10 years ago on the local news up in Cumbria that there were 2 people in Cumbria who were allergic to bananas. And it's kind of like, well, okay, does that mean that we need to include that on the list of declarable products just because there's 2 people in the country who are potentially allergic to it? I think if you suffer from a particular allergy, you probably would want it added on there. However, from a manufacturing point of view, I think you're just going to muddy the waters even more. We struggle sometimes to actually get the right information on the 14 and make sure that we've put the right information on the packaging, all the rest of it. If we add more and more onto it, we're just going to make it harder from everybody to actually comply with it.
Okay, thank you. So that one. Right, okay, so the next one. Oh, how can IFST best support to avoid the recalls and reactions you mentioned, especially informing small businesses, including by publicising the Food Allergens Knowledge Hub? And there's obviously there's a link there.
Yeah. I think part of it is just about making people aware. So whether it's through the Knowledge Hub, whether it's through webinars like this, making people aware of what allergens are, why they're important, what level they need to actually look at. I have quite a big personal concern about very small manufacturers, and particularly the number of sort of household manufacturers that sprung up over COVID who are offering free from products. Understanding the controls that big manufacturers put in place, that's never going to happen in your own home kitchen type thing. So personal opinion, I would be very nervous about buying free from products from that sort of home kitchen type environment.
Yeah.
I think in terms of small manufacturers, really understand what your market is. If you are setting up to be free from, you set up to be free from right from the start. Trying to make free from products in a small production area that also handles the same allergens, I think is going to be very tricky, and I think you potentially run the risk of an issue occurring.
Yeah, I think as I say, the best thing for that is to actually to put out there into the public domain and try and get people to look at the knowledge hub that's there and give them sort of the tools to go and have a look at that knowledge hub to actually achieve to get best practice out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, or pull in the sort of the regulators, the EHOs, to use the source to help them support businesses as well.
Yeah.
Okay, right, let's have a look at this one. So, with regard to grains such as rice and pulses, what can we do with regard to agricultural practice and education to reduce risk?
It's very difficult because if you actually look in the take the UK for example, I know that we don't grow rice in the UK. We do grow some pulses in the UK, but if you look at the UK from an agricultural point of view, you want various crops to be grown in that field. You don't particularly want to just grow wheat every single year in the same field. You have build-up of pests, you have build-up of diseases, so you want that crop rotation around. We're being driven by regulation and by consumers to reduce the amount of pesticides that we apply. Therefore, going through a crop before you plant it is reducing that level down, which means that you can't get rid of all the seeds that are in the ground. So you do have a risk of it's called volunteer crops coming up the second year. You can manage it to an extent if you have a wide range of crops. So if you go from a grain crop to a vegetable crop, it's quite different. So you reduce the risk there. If you only grow grains, then even going from a barley to a wheat, you run the risk that it's going to be present in the soil, it's going to grow at the same time, it's going to get harvested, and you're going to have very little chance of actually spotting it. So is there anything we can do?
I think
Making
it's very,
people
very
aware.
limited. Very
Yeah.
limited unless you're basically keeping the fields fairly clean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay. Right, that's something. This one might be in there. Do we have data available in the UK apart from vital guidelines? I might as well step in.
Okay.
Codex have just issued a report which the UK has been the chairing the meetings. I was in a call the other day. One of the guys that were on that team, he went through the Codex information in terms of how they've come up with the data, how they've looked at the risk levels and took the risk level from 99 down to EDO5, so EDO1 to EDO5, and what that means is the risk of how many people within a population would be at risk from that, and they were quite comfortable with the fact that there wasn't the risk taking that down wasn't going to cause any more issues. But yes, there's quite a detailed report which you can get publicly on this information on Codex. So yeah, Codex is probably the one that's been doing a lot of work behind this.
Good answer, Alex.
Thank you. I mean, I'm just trying to get through the questions here. Okay, something about carrot. What sort of mitigations can we expect in a carrot field in crop rotation with an allergen such as mustard to be certain the risk is low, and with additional steps at the processing site such as washing and peeling of carrots?
There's two potential risks from mustard. So one is you've actually grown mustard as a crop the previous year. And then the second is you've grown mustard as part of a green manure crop to add beneficial soil health back into the soil, if you like. In terms of what can you do to mitigate it, I think if it goes to mustard that you're growing for a leaf point of view, the risk is fairly low because you'll be stripping that out before it sets seeds. If you're growing it from a green manure point of view and it does set seed, then you potentially will get leftover or volunteer crops grown the next year. The risk of that actually getting in touch with the carrot is probably fairly low. The carrot grows in the soil. It's going to get washed, certainly as a minimum, before you eat it. So again, I'm not aware of any work that has been done, but it's what is the risk of that level of mustard coming from the leaf or the seed getting onto that carrot and staying on that carrot and being eaten by somebody who actually suffers from it. If you kind of look at it that way, the risk is very, very low. Okay. Your controls, other than sort of just normal crop rotation, would be doing field risk assessments. So most growers, particularly if you're in the UK, part of Red Tractor, you have to understand what's been grown for sort of at least 3 years prior to the crop you're growing to cover off things like that. Red Tractor actually advise against growing crops that have had mustard for at least 18 months afterwards. Just trying to think of any other controls in terms of the washing side of it. Again, just making sure that your equipment is clean, your washing is good, you're actually achieving good level of clean down. And then if you're actually peeling it, again, you're doing another removal of the outside. You're unlikely that the mustard is going to get into the actual carrot. If you were to look at something like the risk of a nut falling off a tree, not falling off a tree and getting into a carrot, is kind of non-existent. A nut falling off and getting into a lettuce, particularly where you've got like an iceberg that folds over, it can happen. It does happen. There have been some recalls caused by nuts in salad crops or cabbage type crops. Controls in that kind of instance would either be avoid planting under nut trees, cover the crop with mesh so that any nuts that do drop don't go into the crop and contaminate it. You could make sure that you don't harvest the crop under the tree around the time that the actual nuts are present. So if it's, the nut is only there from, let's say, September to November, if your crop is harvested before August, it's not going to be a risk, for example.
Yeah, and I'd say agree that because there have been issues, for instance, with crops rotation in regards like garlic and peanut grown in the same field, and peanuts ending up within the shells, ending up within the garlic clove or the clove. So yeah, there is risks around where things have been grown. Okay, let's move on to the next ones. If an ingredient has peanut at less than 1 ppm or less than 2.5 ppm on the specification, do you think labeling may contain should be used for both cases?
I think it goes back to the previous comments that what does that actually mean? And is that just that they have tested one sample, 2 samples, 5 samples, and they've said, yeah, based on that, we're saying that it is free from. I would be very nervous around that. I think I would want to know what the frequency of their testing is. What, do they do it once a batch, and how big is a batch? What are their controls in terms of, is it actually handled on the line? Is it handled on, in the supply chain? So what is the risks on it before you could make an actual decision on that one?
Okay. Yeah, totally agree with that one. Right. Okay. How about, so another question here. How about when no allergenic protein can be detected? For example, soy lecithin, the soil oil is over processed, that the protein has been denatured. Should this be labeled as an allergen? Would still keep how? I think it's dependent on obviously legislation, because some of the products which are denatured do not have to be labeled.
Yes.
And I think Codex has done some more work on doing stuff to other things that may not need to be labeled as allergenic.
Yeah.
My
initial comment would be there is a list of allergens or allergenic products that do not need to be declared based on the fact that it has been denatured. So
yeah. So yeah, you referred to that, and it usually comes under. If you come under the areas of each allergen, they usually they determine a list that says these do not need to be labelled.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so let me answer this question. Is there any specific guideline applied in prevention of allergen cross-contamination through supply chain?
Any specific legislation
Or specific guideline? It says, I
specific
know for a fact
guidance?
there's one for FDA, Food and Drink Federation. They do
Mhm.
some stuff. And I think if you look at the allergen hub on IFST, there will be specific guidance on there, or a reference to guidance.
Um, I would say a lot of industries do have it, whether it's kind of formal or just more part of standards. So things like Red Tractor in the UK will have information about allergens and what you need to consider. I think a lot of retailers have their own standards and issue guidance out, particularly to primary producers around what allergen controls are expected from them. Um, just trying to think if there's anything else off the top of my head. Those would be the two main ones I would look at, sort of standards and retailer information.
Okay, fine. We've got a couple of minutes more, so I can get a couple more questions in, because we've got to finish at 5:02. So in there, so I'll try and answer. We'll get these ones answered if we can quickly. How can allergen-free manufacturer ensure the safety and integrity of their products when sourcing raw materials from a supplier that handles both allergenic and non-allergenic materials?
Um, it's around the risk assessment, it's around the controls, it's
Yeah.
around actually making sure that what they say they are doing. um, by all means, yes, you can do a little bit of testing as the manufacturer, but the controls really have to come further down the supply chain before it gets to you.
Okay, fine. Okay, so we'll try that one. And then I've got one from yeah, I am a small craft artisan baker selling in farmers markets, artisan market. Will posting may contain traces of, will help me in any legislation if complaint will arise.
Um,
I don't think it was. You have to demonstrate or your due diligence. Basically, you done your own risk assessments in terms of the materials that you're using and why you've based that on that things, because you can still people can be, especially with the high profile cases that have been in the last few years.
I would say that there used to be, and it is available on archive. I think the Food Standards Agency had a very good kind of flow diagram of how you get to, or whether you need to put precautionary allergen labeling on a product or not. It does kind of rely on whether you think something is remote or probable. So there's a little bit of interpretation there. My other view would be go and speak to your trading standards. Trading standards will be quite helpful. They would be more likely to be the people who would prosecute you if something did go wrong. So again, by speaking to them, getting their advice, and then actually adhering to that advice would be useful.
Right. Okay. We've still got two or three questions, so I might just get them forward. I know we can answer
Okay.
them actually
Yep.
there, because we are we are at 5:02, or we're actually a minute over. I'm sorry if we didn't catch everybody's question, but like I say, we'll try and answer them as best as we possibly can. Thank you very much, Malcolm.
Thank you, Alex, for hosting.
And thank you to everybody for attending the webinar today. If we didn't manage to answer your questions, please contact myself or Malcolm directly, and then we'll send the details then we sent with the recording. We will share a recording of the webinar, including the question and answer session, to everyone who attended today via email, and on our online webinar hub at the www.ifst.org.webinars. Before you log off, please fill in our short survey, which will launch after the webinar ends. And thank you again Malcolm, and everyone for attending today. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.